Right, next up, we are going to talk about the interface of the software. Now, in this series of videos, you'll find me jumping between 2016, version 2016 and 2015. But you'll realize that once you get a grasp of how the software works, you could work both in 15 and 16. It's really easy to jump between these two versions. Okay. Oh, by the way, I haven't seen what 17 looks like yet, so I'm really excited for it. This right here is called as the viewport. There are basically three things you should be able to do with the viewport. Now I'm going to hold down my Alt button, left click on the mouse and drag. And this motion is called as tumbling because you're basically tumbling around the object. In this case, there are no objects, so you're tumbling around the grid. So that is left click as I'm holding down my Alt button. Now hold your Alt down again, right click and drag left and right like that, and you see that you're zooming in and out. Now hold your Alt down, try middle click, and you're panning around the scene. So there are three things that you should ideally be able to do with the cameras. You should be able to tumble, Alt left click, zoom, Alt right click, and pan, Alt middle click. Now some of this might be really basic for you guys, but I'm going to assume that you know nothing about Maya in this class and we are going to start from zero. So be patient and we are going to come to the challenging part soon. Okay, if you tap on spacebar, you should ideally be able to see your top view, front view, side view, and your perspective view. Okay, now without having to click on a view, you can simply point in a view, tap again, and there you go. We are full screened, if you will, the front view. Tap, and I'm tapping on the spacebar, point and tap, you don't even have to click. And here I am in the perspective view. So that was viewport, navigation, and the camera views. Okay, you have a huge menu over here. You realize that Maya has so many different functionalities to it that it cannot in any way encompass all the menus in here. The guys who made Maya came up with a solution. They have this sort of drop-down menu, and if you change this drop-down menu from, say, modeling to rigging, you'll see that some of these options change. Okay, I think it's still Windows that these options 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 options remain the same. So go to animation. It's from Windows onwards that these options begin to change. Effects and rendering. Now when we are modeling, we are going to keep ourselves in the modeling section. In fact, for modeling and texturing, we are going to keep ourselves in this particular section, and then eventually we might move on to rendering. But right now, modeling is really what we need, so be aware of this sort of drop-down menu, if you will. This right here is a shelf. This is what we call it. It's a shelf. I want you to think of shelf as a way of creating shortcuts, if you will. Let me give you a very simple example. If I wanted to create a polygonal cube, then the ideal way of doing it is to click on Create, Polygon Primitives, and go to Cube. And that's my cube. I'm going to delete it. The shortcut is to reach out into the polygon's shelf and just click on the polygonal cube. So basically what you have here is a bunch of buttons that act as shortcuts or macros. You can even create your own shortcuts, if you will. We'll get into that eventually, or maybe we won't in this class, but that's what you should know about this little area. It's called as the shelf. To the left hand side, you will see tool settings, and these are your simple tools. Okay, let me go ahead and create that cube once again. If I have my select tool selected, I would either be able to select it or deselect it. Okay, and I want you to see what the option is, the hotkey for it. Hotkeys are really important. The hotkey for your select tool is Q. Okay, quickly take a look down at your keyboard, and I want you to spot where Q is. Right next to your Q is your W, right next to W is E, and then comes R. Q, W, E, R. I want you to remember that, okay? Q, W, E, R. Okay, so that was Q. What happens when you click on this guy right here? This is your move tool. select the object, click on the move tool. I also want you to take a look at the hotkey, which is W. Okay, so W on the keyboard, or simply click here, and now you should be able to move your object. Okay, you can move it in this particular plane, you can move it in this particular plane as well. So that is pressing W. Q to select, W to move. Next is E or rotate tool. So either you click here or you can simply press E and then see what happens. I can rotate the object. I can also rotate it in a particular axis if I will, which is pretty awesome. Q, W, E. And then comes scale or R. And by that I should be able to scale my object up and down. I can scale it in a particular axis if I will, or I can use that central little cube if you will to scale it overall if you can see it. Okay, press Ctrl Z. In fact, in Maya you don't even have to press Ctrl Z, you can just press Z. Okay, so now we know how to not only create objects, but we can also sort of move them, rotate them, scale them, and some of the options for these move, rotate, and scale can actually be found here in the tool settings. So if you simply double click on this, these are your move tool options, rotate tool options, if you will, which is pretty awesome. Okay, to the right hand side is something called as the channel box. I want you to see how the channel box works. If I want to move this, let's say I would move it to the right by 5 units. You can kind of eyeball those 5 units, or you can simply punch in a -5 right here. Rotate Z. So you can certainly control these using numbers. What if I wanted to rotate like this by 45 degrees? Either you can eyeball it. Let's go this way. Or you can simply punch in a 45 in my rotate X, which is so much more precise. If I want this to be twice the size, remember I'm going to punch in a 2 here, here, and here. Okay, so you can manipulate this object here, or you can also manipulate it here in the channel box. Just for your information, if you press Ctrl A, you will toggle between the channel box and the attribute editor. You can even click here, by the way. This is your channel box and the attribute editor. We have no use for the attribute editor right now, but we are going to come to it, so I want you to remember how to access the attribute editor. We're going to use the channel box way more. Let me zero all of this up. Remember, scale value is a default of 1, not 0, which means it goes back exactly to the origin. So that was our channel box. One of the most important tools that we are going to be using while we are working in Maya is called as the outliner. And to access that, you're simply going to click on Windows, Outliner. And really what it is it's a very simple tool that showcases all the objects that you have in the scene. In this particular case, I have a simple P cube 1, which means polygonal cube 1. Let me move this to the side. Let me create a sphere. P sphere 1 is a polygonal sphere 1. Now imagine if the cube was inside the sphere for some reason and you weren't able to see it in the viewport. The outliner kind of helps you to look at objects. You can also rename objects simply by double clicking on their name here in the outliner. Let's call it ball score 01. Okay, so yeah, you can double click on the names here in the outliner, or you can simply click here as well in the channel box. Okay, box. How about I don't give an underscore, I give a space instead. Space 01. I want you to see what happens to that space. You see what Maya has done? Maya has actually removed that space and sort of replaced it with an underscore. Okay, so no spaces. I want you to stick with underscores instead. And the names of your objects have to be legitimate. So I don't eventually want to see P spheres and P cubes. I want to see boxes, tables, balls, that kind of stuff. So make sure that when you have thousands and thousands of objects eventually in your outliner, just by looking at the name, you should know exactly what object it is. Okay, so that was incredibly simple. Two things that you should know real quick is that this is your timeline right here, which is something that we are not going to be using at all, but you should know that this is your timeline. And this right here, all the way in the corner, this button is a script editor. Once again, we're not going to be using the script editor, but I want you to know that basically every little command that you run, like creating a cube, creating a sphere, and all the different commands and tools that you're going to learn from here on are basically scripts that Maya runs in the back end. You can learn these scripts, and there's a huge advantage to learning it. Is as soon as you learn all of this, you can actually manipulate Maya better. Okay, so let me give you an example. Let me clear all of this. Okay, let me move this cube, and you see, you've moved that cube. And I know that this doesn't make a lot of sense. This is not something that we are going to learn in this class at all, but I just wanted to show you guys that the scripts are here for us to learn if we wanted to. The more we learn it, the easier and faster we can actually start to work with Maya. Okay, so those are your MEL scripts, M-E-L, Maya Embedded Language. That's what MEL stands for. So MEL scripts is what we are using here. We won't be learning any of MEL scripting in this class, so you don't have to worry about it. Let me get rid of it. Let me just make a new scene. Start out by creating this cube again. Okay, so now you know how to create objects. To create a polygonal object, either you can reach into the shelf or you can click on create, and then you can go into polygonal primitives, and here are different kinds of polygonal primitives that I certainly want you to try out. This is going to be one of your homeworks, of course, is for you to actually try out each one of these primitives. I want you to know exactly what these primitives are. I want you to make a cylinder and study it. I want you to make a cone and study it. I want you to make a plane and a torus and a prism and a pyramid. I want you to learn what these primitives are. Primitives are basically simplified geometric shapes, if you will. If you come to think of it, really the whole idea of modeling an object is looking at an object, reverse engineering that object into a primitive, a simplified primitive, and then you take that primitive, start with that primitive in Maya, and then make that complex object that you guys are going towards. Okay, so a simple pen, ideally, to make a pen you can start with a cylinder. To make a, let's say for example, to make a globe, you can start with a sphere, and for that it's important that you learn all of these primitives. Not only are you learning all the primitives, you're also going into these little squares. Are you looking at these squares right here? These are called as option boxes. Okay, so let me just, instead of creating a simple cube, let me go into the option box and let me mess with these options. I can say I want the width of it to be 10 units. Let me create it, and now that cube comes with a sort of higher width, if you will. It's much wider than its higher or broader. Okay, so I certainly want you guys to go into each one of these. Oh, by the way, let me show you this also. Because this is a menu that you guys are going to be using over and over again, you can simply click on this little horizontal strip and pop the menu out, which is pretty awesome. Create. This is the menu that I'm going to be using, so pop that menu out, keep it to the side, and you can go into the option box of your cube. You see my width is set to 10. I want you to certainly mess with this. One way to learn it is to click on help and say help, and this is going to open up a web page that will tell you everything that there is to know about these options. And eventually, once you've mucked around, click on edit and say reset, and it'll bring everything back to its default, which is nice. So you can certainly play around with it, and then you can reset it, which is fantastic. So so one of your homeworks is going to be to learn all of these right here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and create that cube. Once again, I'm going to show you a bunch of options which are going to help you. We spoke about creating the cube already. I also want you to learn how to sort of be able to see this cube. So the mode that we are looking at it now is basically called a sort of, what's the word? The shaded is really the term. Okay, so this is shaded. If you click on 4 on the keyboard, not F4, just 4 on the keyboard, you should be able to look at the wireframe mode of it, which means I should be able to see the wireframe. That's pressing 4. Pressing 5 on the keyboard will get me to see the shaded display. There it is. That's the word I was blanking out on. So 5 is for shaded. 6 is textured display. Now we don't have any texture on this, but if we did have any textures, then the textures would have shown up. So remember that 4 is for wireframe, 5 is for shaded, 6 is for textured. Okay, now you're probably wondering, why did we start with 4? Why didn't we? What about 1, 2, and 3? So let me quickly show you what happens when you click on 1, 2, and 3. 1 shows you the object the way it is. 2 kind of shows you what will happen if you smooth this object. We're going to learn about smoothing in detail, by the way. Okay, so it shows you, it gives you the wireframe of the object the way it is, and what will happen if you smooth it eventually. So that is pressing 2. Pressing 3 will only show the smooth preview. What happens when you smooth a particular cube? If you take a clay piece which is sort of made into a cube, and if you start to smooth it, you realize that you will eventually make a sphere out of it. Okay, so yeah, that's 1, 2, 3. 1 is the mode that we are going to keep ourselves in for now. 4 wireframe, 5 shaded, 6 textured, 7 is lit. And right now we have no lights in the scene, and that's why our object is appearing to be completely dark. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, that's pretty simple. I'm going to stick with 1, and I'm going to stick with 5 for now. Okay, let's quickly also show you how to hide and show objects. It's really simple to hide objects. Select an object and press Ctrl H on the keyboard. Ctrl H to hide it. You haven't deleted the object. It still exists in the outliner, as you can see it, but it's hidden. Okay, and you should be able to see that when you look at it in the outliner, hidden objects are grayed out. So if you see a grayed out object, it means that it's an object that exists, which is hidden. Select that object again in the outliner to be able to show it. Of course, you can't select it here in the viewport anymore. So select it here in the outliner and Shift H to bring it back. Control H and Shift H. Okay, so that was hiding and showing of objects.